Chevrolet didn't kill the Chevelle because it stopped selling. In its next to last year on the order sheet, the nameplate still moved more than 328,000 cars, and the trim that outsold everything else under its own name was the one that talked Chevrolet into erasing Chevelle from the order sheet completely. 13 model years, 4 completely different identities, and buried inside all of it sits one specific 1970 engine so overbuilt that Chevrolet's own paperwork may have quietly undersold it, not to inflate the number, but to hide how strong the car actually was. That one's coming. I went through 13 model years of factory build sheets, sales figures, and every major trim change Chevrolet made to this platform between 1964 and 1977. By the time the name disappeared, genuine survivors of its best year were already trading for over $500,000 at auction. Most people driving past a rusted one in a barn today have no idea what they're looking at. Everyone assumes a muscle car dies from bad sales, an insurance crackdown, or a failed crash test. Chevrolet's own sales charts say otherwise. This one died from success, quietly buried by a family sedan wearing its own body. But we start small, with the Chevelle nobody remembers, the one that made all the rest of them possible. Before there was a muscle car, there was a plain one, and it's the plain one that explains everything else. The Chevelle 300 was Chevrolet's base series when the whole lineup launched for 1964, sitting at the bottom of the range with 6-cylinder engines, small block V8 options, and about as much flash as a filing cabinet. It wasn't built to turn heads, it was built to get a price on a window sticker low enough to pull a customer through the showroom door. That's the trick. Model guides from the era list the 1964 Chevelle 300 as its own distinct series, not just a stripped options box, which tells you Chevrolet took this end of the market seriously. In 1965 came the 300 Deluxe, a step up in trim and comfort, aimed at buyers who wanted a little more without paying Malibu money. Picture a young couple in 1965 standing on a dealer lot in Ohio, looking at a 300 Deluxe next to a Malibu 20 feet away, and the salesman quietly walking them toward the pricier car. That was the whole point of the 300 line. Get them in, then trade them up. By the end of the decade, Chevrolet's own showroom numbers proved the strategy worked exactly as planned. Buyers walked in pricing a 300 and walked out signing for a Malibu. Chevrolet's own model archives group 300 and 300 Deluxe, right alongside Malibu, SS, Concours, and Laguna, as full branches of one family tree, not afterthoughts. But as SS and Malibu grabbed the magazine covers through the late 1960s, the 300 line quietly faded from Chevrolet's own advertising. By the 1970s, the names 300 and 300 Deluxe were gone completely, replaced by Malibu and Laguna as the faces of the family. The workhorse had done its job and vanished without a headline. It set the stage for a car that needed a foundation before it could build a legend, and that foundation had a name and a birthplace. Chevrolet didn't stumble into the midsize market. It walked in with a plan, and the plan had a specific empty space it was built to fill. Chevrolet unveiled the Chevelle at a press conference in Chicago in 1963, introducing it on September 26th of that year as a 1964 model, positioned deliberately between the compact Chevy 2 and the full-size Impala. It rode on General Motors' brand new A-body platform, engineered from scratch rather than borrowed from an existing car. And Chevrolet didn't build it as one thing. It came as a 2-door coupe, a 4-door sedan, a convertible, and a station wagon, which meant it was never meant to be a niche performance toy. It was meant to be everything a mid-size family might need, all wearing the same nameplate. The early trim structure was simple: 300, 300 Deluxe, and Malibu, with Malibu pulling ahead of the other two almost immediately in popularity. Over 4 model years, from 1964 through 1967, Chevrolet built approximately 1.49 million of these first-generation Chevelles, a number that turned a brand new nameplate into an instant fixture of American driveways. The platform later spun off the El Camino, a car-truck hybrid that stretched the Chevelle idea even further than Chevrolet originally planned. Museum historians point out that the SS 396 series would close out this first generation, meaning that even in its founding years, the Chevelle was already building towards something louder than a family sedan. That louder direction had a face, and that face belonged to the trim level that would eventually outlive the entire nameplate that carried it. Here's a strange fact worth sitting with. The most successful part of the Chevelle eventually became the reason the word Chevelle disappeared. The Malibu trim was introduced in 1964 as the top regular series of the new Chevelle lineup, offered in coupe, sedan, convertible, and wagon body styles right from the start. It didn't take long for buyers to decide it was the one they wanted. Malibu became the most popular trim almost immediately, and it stayed that way for over a decade, riding alongside SS 396 as that performance series broke off into its own line by 1966. Through the mid-1970s, Chevrolet's own model documentation shows the lineup narrowing down to Malibu and Malibu Classic models in coupe, sedan, and wagon form, meaning the family car had quietly become the backbone of the entire nameplate. Then came the number that decided everything. In 1977, the Malibu Classic trim alone accounted for 238,322 units, more than the base Malibu and the sportier Laguna Type S3 combined. Chevrolet's own sales chart was telling them something plainly. Customers weren't buying a Chevelle anymore. They were buying a Malibu that happened to say Chevelle on the trunk lid. So when Chevrolet redesigned its midsize lineup for 1978, the company made the midsize cars Malibus by name, full stop. The Volo Museum states it directly. Since Chevrolet began referring to its midsize cars as Malibus starting in 1978, 1977 was the last year the Chevelle name was used at all. The volume leader had quietly become the heir. But before that ending, there was still a whole family identity to build out, and one small, often overlooked branch of it was about to show up in station wagon driveways across the country. Not every Chevelle needed a big block engine to matter to the person driving it. Chevrolet actually built a three-tier wagon hierarchy underneath the family name. Nomad as the stripped-down entry wagon, Greenbrier one step up trimmed like a base Malibu, and Concours sitting on top of both, with the Concours Estate adding faux wood side paneling for buyers who wanted the look of real luxury without stepping outside the Chevelle name. The Concours and Concours Estate names mark Chevrolet's upscale wagon and trim variants within the Chevelle family, listed formally alongside 300, Malibu, SS, and Laguna as their own distinct sub-model range. It's easy to forget this car existed at all, buried as it is under decades of muscle car magazine covers. But its existence says something important. Chevelle was never only a performance nameplate. It was Chevrolet's mainstream midsize answer to everyday American life, hauling groceries and vacation luggage just as often as it hauled quarter-mile times. As Laguna and Malibu absorbed more of the sporty and mainline roles heading into the 1973 redesign, the Concours name lost its distinct identity and faded from the lineup. Another example of how General Motors constantly reshuffled its sub-series names as styling cycles and marketing needs shifted underneath them. The Concours never got its own magazine feature or its own legend, but it kept the lights on in the family imagination while the performance side of the Chevelle story was about to catch fire. Somewhere inside a car built for grocery runs, Chevrolet's engineers dropped in an engine that had no business being there, and everything changed. In 1965, Chevrolet introduced the Z16 package on the Chevelle, adding a 396 cubic inch big block V8 to a car that had spent its first year being perfectly sensible. That's the moment the performance story got serious. The Z16 was built in an extremely limited run, 201 cars total, one prototype assembled at the Baltimore plant, plus 200 production units built in Kansas City, and by most accounts it functioned as a proof of concept more than a real sales program. Chevrolet was testing the water. The water turned out to be exactly what buyers wanted. In 1966, the SS 396 became a full series in its own right. Not an option box anymore, with the 396 big block engine now standard equipment, rather than a special order. Power outputs for the SS 396 series reached as high as 375 horsepower, an enormous number for a mid-size family platform just 2 years removed from six-cylinder base models. The 1966 and 1967 cars carried new styling cues to match the new attitude. A domed hood, specific SS badging, bucket seats, and a center console that had actually started back in 1964 as part of the original Malibu SS package. This wasn't an accident of engineering. It was Chevrolet chasing the same youth market that was fueling stoplight drag racing culture across the country, a market Pontiac had already tapped with the GTO. Volo Museum historians describe this SS 396 as the series that closed out the Chevelle's first generation, which is fitting because it had already answered the only question that mattered. Could a family car wear a big block engine and still sell in volume? It could. And that answer was about to get a lot louder, because the whole car was about to be redesigned around exactly that idea. Chevrolet didn't just tune the engine for the next act, it rebuilt the entire car around the idea of looking as fast as it now was. For 1968, the Chevelle underwent a full redesign, shortening the wheelbase on coupes and convertibles and introducing a semi-fastback roofline that gave the whole car a far more aggressive, curvier stance than anything from the first generation, classic cars arena. Calls the years 1968 through 1972 the muscle car peak for the entire nameplate, and the sales numbers back that description up hard. That redesign hit its commercial peak the very next year. The 1969 SS 396 became the single most recognizable Chevelle silhouette Chevrolet ever built, and it's the model year collectors still chase hardest today. Across the first two generations combined, more than 2.5 million Chevelles were sold, a figure that one detailed history calls, without qualification, the best-selling muscle car of its era. The engine range escalated right alongside the styling, 350 cubic inch small blocks, 396 and 402 big blocks, and eventually the enormous 454 in both LS5 and LS6 form. Then the paperwork changed the story in a way that had nothing to do with the engines themselves. In 1971 and 1972, the industry switched from gross horsepower ratings to net horsepower ratings, a bookkeeping shift that made every car in America look weaker on paper, even when nothing mechanical had changed. Styling updates through 1971 and 1972, mostly around the grille and bumpers, marked the last visible steps of the classic muscle car look, before a much heavier redesign loomed on the horizon. For one specific year, sitting right in the middle of this run, none of that decline had happened yet. The compression was still high, the rating was still gross, and Chevrolet built the one Chevelle that every single chapter of this story has been quietly building toward. At a stoplight in 1970, the car in the next lane might have looked like somebody's uncle's grocery getter, right up until the light turned green. This is the one, the 1970 Chevelle SS 454, and specifically the version built around the LS6 454 cubic inch V8, sits at the absolute center of everything this story has been building toward. Alexander Classic Cars calls it, without hedging, perhaps the most iconic model in the entire Chevelle lineup. Picture the car staged at a drag strip in the summer of 1970. It rolls to the line looking almost apologetic, a mid-size Chevrolet, sedan adjacent in its proportions, nothing like the pony cars parked in the staging lanes around it. The only hints are the cowl induction hood and the SS badging low on the fender. Under that hood sits the LS6, the 454 cubic inch big block rated at 450 horsepower from the factory, a figure that alone put it among the most powerful factory muscle car engines ever built. Mechanics who worked the line in Flint that year would have known the real story. Period testers and modern engine builders alike have long suspected the factory number was modesty, not exaggeration, with true output running well over 500 horsepower. The engine idles with a lump in the cam you can feel in your chest standing 10 feet away. The tree drops. The driver feeds in throttle carefully because this much torque through street tires on an A-body chassis will light the rear end up if you're careless, and then the car hooks and goes. Documented runs put the LS6 through the quarter mile in 13.12 seconds at 107 miles an hour on street tires, not slicks, not a prepped surface. The same solid A-body chassis underneath the family Malibu 2 bays over in the showroom is what keeps this car planted at that speed, giving it a composed, settled feel that let it embarrass flashier, more glamorous pony cars in a straight line, despite getting less ink in the magazines. Alexander Classic Cars describes it plainly as a beast, a car that could embarrass machines costing 3 times as much, cut forward less than 2 years. The industry-wide shift to net horsepower ratings and lower compression in 1971 and 1972 make every SS 454 that follows look weaker on paper, freezing this exact car, this exact year, as the unrepeatable peak. Cut forward again, 50-some years, to a bright auction floor under television lights. The same LS6 formula now selling for $200,000 to $300,000 and up, with the current auction record standing at $770,000 for a documented convertible sold in early 2026. The strip legend converted directly into collector currency. That's not a number chasing a spec sheet. That's the entire value proposition the Chevelle had been quietly building since the plain 300 series first got buyers through the door. Genuine, numbers-matching LS6 Chevelles regularly sell in the $150,000 range today, with the best documented examples pushing past $500,000 at major auctions. Fewer of these cars survived intact than most collectors realize, which is exactly why the ones that did survive now command prices that would have seemed absurd to the mechanic who built one on the line in 1970. The car that came after it wasn't a failure. It was something worse for a legend like this. It was heavier, safer, and quieter, and it arrived exactly when the entire industry stopped being able to build cars like the one you just watched leave the line. The next Chevelle didn't lose a drag race. It lost the fight before it even got to the starting line. In 1973, Chevrolet redesigned the Chevelle into what's known as the Colonnade body style, adding fixed B-pillars, larger and heavier sheet metal, and federally mandated 5-mile-per-hour bumpers that changed the entire silhouette of the car. That same year, 1973, turned out to be the final year Chevrolet offered the SS package on the Chevelle at all. After more than 8 years of Super Sport badges going back to the original Malibu SS package in 1964, the SS name simply stopped appearing on order sheets. In its place came the Laguna Type S3, introduced in 1974 and continuing through 1976, and this is the part almost nobody tells you. The Laguna wasn't a straight-line drag strip car at all. Chevrolet built its sloped, urethane nose specifically to cheat the wind on NASCAR superspeedways, and it worked better than anyone at Chevrolet publicly admitted. Cale Yarborough drove 1 to 12 wins in 1974 alone, and the Laguna S3 went on to win 53 NASCAR races and 4 manufacturers' championships across 5 seasons, carrying Yarborough to back-to-back Winston Cup titles in 1976 and 1977. NASCAR eventually ruled the Laguna's aerodynamic advantage too great and banned it from competition after the 1977 season. The car Chevrolet built to replace its muscle car ended up owning the racetrack in a way the SS 454 never did. It was a different kind of performance car for a different kind of decade. The numbers tell you why the change happened. Chevelle sales trended down across this generation, from roughly 387,000 units in 1973 to roughly 328,000 by 1977, a steady decline rather than a collapse, which matters because it means nobody at Chevrolet was staring at a sinking ship. They were staring at a changing map. The 1973 oil crisis reshaped what American buyers wanted and what regulators would allow, and one by one the big engines disappeared. The 400 cubic inch and 454 cubic inch big blocks were gone by the mid-70s, casualties of emissions rules and fuel economy pressure that had nothing to do with how well the Chevelle was actually selling. By 1977, the standard Chevelle engine, the base 6-cylinder, made about 110 horsepower. Sit with that next to the LS6's 450 horsepower. That's not a car that got worse at being a Chevelle. That's a car built inside a completely different set of rules than the one that came 7 years earlier, and there was no engineering fix for a law. The Colonnade Chevelle did what it could within those limits, remaining a steady seller and a practical family car right up through its final year. That steady, unglamorous performance is exactly what set up the boardroom decision that came next. A decision that had nothing to do with whether the car could still sell, and everything to do with what Chevrolet wanted to call it. Here's the part almost nobody knows. There was no press conference for the ending. No recall, no scandal, no crash test that failed. By 1977, General Motors had already committed to an entirely new, significantly smaller A-body platform for 1978. Part of a company-wide downsizing push driven by fuel economy law and the lingering shock of the oil crisis. Chevrolet's answer was to retire the Chevelle name completely and fold it into Malibu, the trim level that had quietly been the Chevelle's best-selling face since 1964. There was no NHTSA investigation behind this. No Pinto-style controversy, no defect, no public outcry. It was a naming decision made in a product planning office, driven by sales charts showing that Malibu Classic alone had moved 238,322 units in 1977, while the Chevelle name attached to it barely registered as a separate identity in the buyer's mind anymore. The car Chevrolet built for 1978 wasn't a failure replacing a failure. It was a survivor renaming itself out of the very success that carried it. The Chevelle's own best-selling child had quietly become the one who took its place. The public never stopped caring, even after the name disappeared. Hemmings and Classic.com data show the average value of big block 1968 to 1972 Chevelle SS cars climbing from about $73,000 in early 2021 to roughly $78,000 in just a few years. And the overall Chevelle collector market now spans anywhere from $30,000 for a driver-quality wagon to well over $600,000 for a documented LS6. Numbers matching originality and a clean paper trail of ownership are what separate the bottom of that range from the top, the same way a clean provenance separates any piece of American history from a good guess. The people driving that market are shifting too. Baby boomers built and sustained Chevelle values for decades because they remembered these cars new, off the lot, parked in driveways up and down their own streets. Now Gen X buyers, many in their 50s, are stepping in with a different memory attached to the same nameplate. Watching a father work on a Chevelle or a Camaro on a Saturday afternoon in the garage. Wrench in hand, radio on. The name Chevrolet, erased in 1978, did not disappear for good either. Not the way it looked on paper. Malibu, the trim that quietly cannibalized its own parent, went on alone for 5 more years, vanished in 1983, then came back in 1997 and kept selling as Chevrolet's mainstream midsize car for almost 3 decades after that. Badge unchanged, format unchanged, name intact. Somewhere in a warehouse today sits the actual sheet metal badge off a 1964 Chevelle Malibu. Same script, same chrome, same 5 letters, next to the badge off a 1978 model that no longer says Chevelle anywhere on the car. Nobody redesigned that badge. Chevrolet just stopped putting the other word next to it. Here's the part of this story most people get backward. Malibu didn't just survive the name that swallowed it. It kept going for 2 more decades as Chevrolet's mainstream midsize car, long after every muscle car rival that once mocked it was gone. But Chevrolet wasn't the only Detroit nameplate playing that same game of reinvention under the same fuel crisis pressure. Ford took a car that had already reinvented itself once and pushed it through generations most people don't even realize existed between 1971 and 1997. Watch every Ford Thunderbird. Explained, The Lost Generations, from 1971 to 1997, to see what happens when a legend gets reinvented. One generation too many times.